So, welcome everybody to this next episode of the Humpty Project, and I'm joined today from a man from down under, Michael Rixon from Australia, mate. And I don't do very good
Pleasure to
accents.
be with you.
Yeah, Michael and I
G'day.
discovered each other on LinkedIn, and
That's
we
correct.
both
Yep.
follow some of the same people. Although I would say we oftentimes come at some of the posts from very divergent points of view. And Michael's voice, as I got to know Michael, we've talked a couple times on Google or Teams meetings or Zoom. We've kind of talked and just connected outside of any formal podcast. And Michael brings a lot of thoughts that might not be well considered, and it really relates to his experience, some very personal experiences in what we'll call the DEI space, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the viewpoint of a younger gentleman that has his own trauma from that. And there's been a lot of things I've learned during it, but what I want to do is give the stage here, or the mic at least, to Michael to introduce himself and share what's been on his mind. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Robert, for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you on LinkedIn and reaching across the other side of the world to have a chat to me. I really do appreciate it. So myself, I've kind of been engaging with uh, the what would you say, the DEI influencer space, the top LinkedIn voices on this space now, I guess, for about 5 months, I guess. And for me personally, yeah, like to bring my perspective, as you alluded to, on DEI and where it falls. So, but my personal experience, I remember back in 2018, my first experience with DEI was, as I've mentioned to you, being let go, so to speak, from a promotional opportunity because of being a male and not having. So you've got the company having the incentive of wanting to reach their diversity targets, and one of those is gender equity. And so, as part of trying to reach that, I went from having a promotion to being let go because of my being one of the junior males, so to speak, in the team. That was, the easiest way to try and, from a corporate perspective, to reach that diversity goal. If you're
So,
a leader, a manager, you're trying to get those corporate diversity targets, you probably get rid of the most junior or inexperienced or least expertised males within the workforce. And so that's kind of my first interaction with it. And aside from that, I work in technology, and I understand, like, the DEI, like, the ultimate goal is, that those from underrepresented groups are more represented within the industry, and so there's less of a domination, so to speak, based on demographics. And so currently, if you look at the technology space, there's a lot of white Asian males in that space. And so that, I guess you could say, the DEI ideology is to break that up more by different demographic groups and increase representation from those underrepresented groups. So you could say, females, well, in the US situation, Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, etc. And so, at a large perspective, you can understand how that could be supported, have a good look, but on an individual level, the way it's kind of perceived is like, oh, this is a skin color or sex discrimination criteria as part of hiring and promotion opportunities within the technology field. And that's where the polarization and the divisiveness and the emotions get really heated, so to speak, get really elevated. And that's where the controversy is. And I don't want to delve into US politics and know how divisive and incredibly polarizing and emotional it is, especially like what 2 months ago until the US election. Um, I think I'm not sure if I shared with you the bell curves of political polarization over the years, but if you look back to the 80s and 90s, have a
I
lot of
saw that
overlap
on,
with.
you posted that on LinkedIn, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So like it's become very tribal. Like no longer is there lots of overlap. It's like you're on this team or this team. You go with all the Republican viewpoints or you go with all the Democratic viewpoints, and if you don't subscribe to everything, then it's almost as if you're disloyal. You're not really on board, and um, so if you want to feel part of either side, you have to subscribe to all the ideological positions, which I think is it removes the centre ground. That the centrist, even-handed kind of person who's sympathises with both viewpoints, that's kind of been levelled out. And I don't think that's healthy. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. I
Okay.
guess yeah. Did you want me to go into more personal experiences, or
Well,
yeah, let me know what you
let
want
me
to
take it,
direct it.
let me take it back to, I mean, certainly we could talk about family and, your upbringing and all of that, but I think what's relevant, knowing that podcast formats like this tend to be optimized with a 30-ish minute discussion. We'll try to keep it tight.
Hmm.
For sure, though, I do echo what you say about polarized conversation and almost a purity test that you have to be pure on every issue or you're an enemy. Uh, but we're not going to go too far down that path today. What what I think when I think about you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're somebody who graduated university, landed something of a dream job, I think, a good job in a good, reputable company where it looked like a launch pad toward a successful career. And that would have made you around 23 years old then, right?
Correct. Yep.
When 2018 when 2018 came and you were looking to grow in the organization, but we're told, in fact, no, we've got too many that look like you, fit your demographics, so you're actually going to be out of the organization. And that's where a lot of your, I said earlier, trauma stems from.
Hmm.
So that's
So
fair to
yeah,
say. Am I correct?
yeah, correct. So there's
Yeah.
trauma from that. you know, that was my first encounter, so to speak, with DEI, and first impressions last, and that was definitely a very personal first impression, and
Right.
also yes, I went back to uni, did the Masters of IT, and I thought that if I get really good grades, I could be eligible for a scholarship, and um, I think at RMIT, the university I was at, they call it diversity in tech scholarship. So it's not so much based on your academic results, but on your demographics. So you can imagine if you're an Asian or white male in tech, you're not, so to speak, contributing to diversity in technology, and so you're just not eligible. And that's basically what I was told. You're not eligible because you're a white male, and so it doesn't
Right.
matter how good your results are, you're discriminate. I hate to use these words, but it's discriminated against based on skin color and sex. Uh, and also with internships, I did a coding boot camp and learned that there I was ineligible for diversity in tech scholarship. They had a different name for it, and what I found interesting was, like with DEI, there's been a movement, so to speak, towards scholarships and grants and all that based on, rather than socio-economic positions of people in diversity, it's based on their skin color, sex, and sometimes sexual orientation. And I think that's where a lot of the controversy arises. Like I think Scott Galloway, who I admire and get a lot of influence from, like posed the question like who should receive, like who should be preferred, the daughter of like an ethnically diverse billionaire, or impoverished white boy, growing up in rural America, so to speak, who should get
Right.
the preferential treatment, so to speak, who should get a bit more support in college admissions, in landing their first corporate gig. And I think it's fair to say overwhelmingly in the DEI space that there's a huge focus on demographics and a huge blind spot for socioeconomic background and adversity. And so that's really polarizing if you meet the privileged demographic criteria, but not necessarily the privileged socioeconomic background. And so no longer are like those grants and scholarships primarily based on socioeconomic background, but on demographics. And that's polarizing. As a young person, you're trying to get somewhere in your career, do well, and if you're held back because of your skin color and sex, that can be quite personal and divisive, and feel like that's unfair. That doesn't feel right. So I've tried to make that point to the DEI voices that you and I both interact with, and yeah, I'm trying to bring this insight because I think it's. I've obviously got the perspective of a guy in his late 20s, white male, technology industry, and you get to see like the real impact of it beyond the nice advertising of it that you see by those influencers.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion with you, and you were keen to have this discussion, is I recognize that from a purist point of view, somebody that wants to learn or unlearn more about themselves, like me, that generally takes the position of DEI being a net positive, a favorable thing, is that having you on, quite frankly, I'm sure there's some people who are more puristic in the way they look at the DEI space and say I shouldn't really even be offering this perspective, but
Get him off. Cancel.
there's a dynamic I see, and you talked about politics. Well, you talked about politics, and this dynamic is not, it's certainly super divisive here, but this dynamic is not unseen throughout other parts of the world where we're seeing a group of people who feel disaffected, disenfranchised. Many of them are younger white men. It isn't always because of DEI space. Sometimes that's used simply as a wedge because it's easy for people to understand, and it's easy to draw. It's easy to draw lines and put people in boxes. But there are cases. I'm certain there are cases where the wealthy person that's not necessarily qualified for a university and gets in on ethnicity benefits or for being of an ethnic group or a gender, etc. They're, what did you describe? The daughter of a wealthy immigrant family may have preferential treatment in terms of college placement than the white boy from an impoverished Appalachian town. But I think overwhelmingly the statistics are that our society is operated in a patriarchal way where the white man in particular and white people have had systems really built around benefiting them and for their comfort. So I think generally you don't disagree with that premise that the systems themselves for many, many years have benefited through default white males or people of Caucasian, at least in the Americas, Caucasian, and I think probably the same, knowing what I know about Indigenous in Australia. But there's no doubt that if we're not speaking to and offering some opportunity for people who feel disenfranchised, I think what we've got is kind of a powder keg, and I think that's what we're seeing in our political systems. We're seeing a populace that feels completely disenfranchised. Now, many of them, it may not be because they were denied the opportunity for a higher education or not placed. It's really simply that a lot of work has gone away for people who are without more than manual labor skills, for instance. The jobs that were available when I grew up, there were a lot of jobs where you could work in a factory without a lot of learned skills or educated skills, and you could have a comfortable life and a home and maybe even a boat. And where I lived, a house, second house, a small house in the Poconos, and you go boating on the lake. So that's why I wanted to have you on here, because you do bring thoughtful conversation to this
Thank you.
that others aren't necessarily putting forward. There's a lot of people who are just, frankly, just you say you say the three letters DEI, and they're immediately
They rush to their
immediately
team,
in
their viewpoint.
opposition. Um, yeah, you won't ever find me, Michael. You won't ever find me saying, "Well, that's reverse discrimination," because I don't think discrimination exists necessarily uh, outside of outside of the systems that support it. But there's no doubt that there can be situations like yours where preferential treatment was given to others, and it certainly feels like discrimination. I'll draw a fine line and say I think that discrimination, like we use generally in this space, and I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who likes doing things like this. I have a regular job, and I do this on my own time. So I no expert, but I think that without the systems to support something, you'll hear a lot of people say that's reverse discrimination, and it really isn't. That might be biases or prejudices toward people, or not a nice way to treat other people. But generally, there's very little chance that systems are going to discriminate in this country against me. There simply aren't. People are not going to deny me a loan or red line a property application when I want to buy a house. I'm not going to be racially profiled, things like that. So that's why you'll hear me say that. But there's no doubt that there's a lot of people who are saying, well, this isn't fair. I'm not being considered on my merits. And where is that line then? Where we, for many, many years, have had a preferential seat and an opportunity because of who we know and the systems that have been built to help us or protect us. Where do you draw that line, and how do you correct it? I don't know if there's any easy answer, but I don't think you should ignore people who are thoughtful and saying, what systems are there for men, particularly with the pressures that men face to feel like breadwinners? And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but because I think I'm trying to capture the essence of what I've seen you talk about. Men feel more pressure to be the breadwinners, to provide, to be strong, and generally, I think what you're hearing is, well, just suck it up, Michael. There's been lots of opportunity for you as a white guy. This is just the way it goes. Yeah, there's no grants for you to get some assistance beyond what you've already had. So you've had all the benefits. Sit back and suck it up, Buttercup. You're a guy anyway. You should be strong enough to handle this. But there's a lot of men. Suicide rates are higher for younger men. We know that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we can't just like brush it off the rug, under the rug, or say, Michael, get over it. So that's kind of
Um,
a very circuitous way of trying to open the door for you to add some color again.
cool. Um, I think there's like, I hate, yeah, to go back to like age groups, but like, obviously the experience you have, like the 80s, 90s, noughties, compared to someone like me who's grown up in, the 10s, 20s, when there's a rebalancing, so to speak, that there's a reprioritization, and there's no doubt that as a white male, you've got a much better up ramp into the middle class, into opportunity to have a home, to support the family in the 80s and 90s compared to nowadays. And so you've got these economic pressures as well. If you look at the median income or salary compared to the median house price, that ratio has certainly gone up. It's much more challenging. You've obviously got inflationary pressures at the moment. And so when you talk about white men have had it really good and all this, it's like, well, I wasn't there back in the 80s and 90s and noughties, enjoying this
Right.
white male privilege and, having a blast, so to speak. And so you see like executives and industry leaders who are, so to speak, like men, talking about these privileges, and you're like, well, I haven't experienced that. I wasn't there, and now it's certainly shifted. There's the education inflation, so to speak, where more and more people are getting tertiary education, and so a lot of the time, like a bachelor isn't that impressive. You need to get a master's, you need to get some graduate diplomas, it's
Right.
something more, and so you get saddled with all this student debt. And I certainly know that in the US experience is very, it's a heavy load. It's a heavy load. You got your student loans and all the interest you have to pay on that. So that's one point I'd make. I'm thinking what the second point.
I'll jump in and say, would you agree or disagree with this comment? And that is, while you haven't necessarily had the same sort of benefits that maybe a 50-year-old white man in Australia would have had, and they certainly wouldn't have faced challenges where organizations were looking to place people to become more diverse, you'd agree that in general, your family probably had benefits that allowed you to get toward university easier than someone else that was in a, I don't want to say protected class, I don't think that's the proper term, but somebody that was not an Asian or white man. Your family had a bit of a leg up. They were a little higher on the rung in general. In general, I think that's what I've seen, is that although younger people may be facing challenges with diversity and inclusion initiatives, their families have also had the benefits of accruing wealth, owning property, and being networked and connected to people in university, etc. That still doesn't negate what you've gone through.
I think one of the things about DEI is it's very American based. Like you can see when reading DEI influences, there's so much coming from the context of America, and slavery and 1960s racial segregation, and I think there needs to be that nuance that's like, I'm in Australia, and it's a very different experience. It's a very multicultural society, certainly in Melbourne. I grew up, my best friends were Chinese and Indian, right? And I grew up never really noticing I was a white male. So it never really occurred to me. So a lot of this DEI, what would you call it, influence is coming from America, and that's the context that's coming into other countries such as Australia. And so this advantage, so to speak, you mentioned like bank loans and approvals and home loans, and I've never heard of that in the Australian context, that you would be preferentially treated because of being white. It's just something I've never come across, but I've heard of that kind of discrimination happening in America in the past. So I think if there's a DEI influencer or someone in that space listening, it's important to realise the different socio-economic contexts of like each country and each culture. Australia is like a success story for multiculturalism. If there's one thing Australia has not been successful at, it's the integration with the Indigenous people, so to speak. It's probably the one, tarring on Australia's history, is that there's never been a proper full integration with Indigenous Australians and the rest of Australia. We've been very successful, bringing in Vietnamese and the Chinese, Indian, Lebanese, like all these waves of immigration to Australia have been comparatively very successful compared to other countries, but the integration with Indigenous Australians is probably where Australia has let itself behind. And I think no matter where you are on the political spectrum in Australia, there's an acknowledgement of bridging the gap, so to speak, between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians. So that's all I say there. Going to your question was about, has your family had advantages because they're white compared to other families in Australia? And that's a very interesting question. I haven't properly considered it to have an informed answer to that.
Okay. Well,
It's something I don't know. I
as I
don't know
said,
how
we
they
have a
would treat it.
limited amount of.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
don't
You got.
know enough about your country. Certainly, the indigenous, I can probably draw a parallel toward the Black or African American community in the U.S. in terms of how how they experience the world versus a white family.
Yep.
But I pulled something up because I heard this today on another call, Michael, and it's Google, so we're going to trust that it's. I'm going to trust that it's true because I've heard it a few times. McKinsey and Company found that organizations that are more diverse than their peers are also more profitable. And I've seen that they're more innovative as well. And I think it's so when you say it is American focused, I think there is a lot of data that suggests when companies are truly more not only diverse, but really inclusive, because diversity without inclusion doesn't really mean a lot. And that's been one of your complaints, as I recall when we talked before. If you're diverse and you've got a lot of people that you can say, I've got all the, all the diversity boxes checked, but all those people are in positions where they don't have a voice and that voice isn't heard, isn't that's where the equity and inclusion part jumps in. Diverse doesn't really mean that much if those diverse voices and viewpoints aren't being heard. But I've
Mm.
seen from a number of people, investment bankers and venture capitalists, that more diverse organizations are more innovative, more profitable. I mean, they're just gathering more information from a wider group of people than the normal board of white guys that you think of when you think of companies. So I think you're
Can I make a
probably
quick point
right
on
that
that?
for sure DEI initiatives are pretty well driven from here,
Yeah.
here being the U.S. But I'll tell you, a lot of the people I see, strangely enough, the people I follow, or at least I've run into on LinkedIn, and the algorithm is sending them to me, is UK based.
Yep.
So a lot of them
Yeah.
are UK based
A
folks.
lot of British. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry to just.
Not that we're much different than the British in terms of our history over here. We're colonizers, effectively.
We're the convicts down here in Australia. We're better at
That's
cricket,
what
but
I never knew. I never really knew if that was true or that just, but I
no,
guess
no,
it
it's
was
very
kind of,
competitive. We've got the Ashes series every 3 or so years, Australia versus the UK, so it's a bit of national pride there. Um, but yeah, sorry. To your point about diversity, I'd love to see more like control groups and studies on this. The McKinsey research that you referenced, I think it was 2016 research study done by McKinsey, and there have been problems flagged with it. I'm not trying to smear it, but just to be careful on it. So I think what they did was they looked at 5 years of growth of a company, and then at the end of that 5 years, like had a look at how ethnically diverse and other demographics diverse. They evaluate that diversity in those metrics, and statistically, like the
right.
inference from it is not quite right in that just because the organisation is more diverse and more successful, there's a correlation there after 5 years, doesn't necessarily mean it's because of the diversity initiatives they've put in place. So you could, like if a company is doing very well, they have more money to spend on diversity initiatives, HR, resources, etc. And so you would absolutely expect a correlation between successful companies and more investment in exteriors such as DEI. If you're a struggling startup, obviously you don't have the resources to spend on, DEI and more HR resources. So I think it's important.
Right.
I'm very mathematical. I like to be very careful about statistical inference and what implications you draw from it. So I'd love to see like control groups and very rigorous peer-reviewed studies on diversity of ethnicity and how that affects an organisation in terms of profitability, employee retention. That would be great insights. and study to see if it's how beneficial it is to an organisation. But yeah, it just needs to be really careful with that McKinsey study, because I think a lot of people have, what do you call in the US, like drunk the Kool-Aid, like haven't looked into what that study actually says, and you know, it's a correlation
Sure.
between variables.
It's a confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
You're looking for something reputable that confirms what you want to believe. I think the McKinsey data is the one that gets the most attention, hence why it shows up first on my Google search. But I just know you talked about the individual earlier, and I just know from an individual point of view, I thought I knew every damn thing when I was your age.
I don't know everything.
I
I'm
didn't. I
ignorant
really
of lots
didn't
of
care
things.
what other. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I liked educating myself, although I never had a formal education. I liked learning new things, but I always thought I was the smartest person in the room. I was generally the loudest in the room. Not a bully mentality from a physical point of view. You look at me now, I'm fit, but I'm certainly not an imposing physical figure.
You're
But
looking good,
louder,
Robert.
and I'm going to
I
outtalk
wouldn't
you,
mind looking like you in
outpassion
the
you.
future. Sorry,
Well, thank you for
continue. I
that.
like a
But
bit of
you
banter.
know,
Go for
I'm not
it.
gonna win any bar fights here. No bromances beginning today. But I guess my point is that I was pretty damn sure of myself, and I didn't really care what other people thought. It's like I know I'm right. I'm certain I'm right. And as I've gotten older and included more people and make an effort to try to include more people and more thoughts and more ways of looking at things. I mean, my wife looks at things completely different than me, and other people do too. I do math different people than other people, and I don't do quadratic formulas or anything really fancy. But when I look at something, you know, I multiply this and subtract that out and multiply it by 2, and people say, well, "What did you just do?" It's logical to me. So my mind works differently, and I've learned that other people, from an individual point of view, I can look at my family or a small subset of people in my office and say, when I listen to them, they see something I didn't see. They see the
Mm.
data. I'm good with data. You're good with data, but they see something I didn't see because I'm coming at it from maybe the eye of growing sales or marketing or cost management, and everybody has a different point of view. Um, and we've talked also when we've talked about masculine versus feminine, and you know, men that paint their nails as a way to show allyship and so on and so forth, and we've talked about the
Oh, we haven't talked about
performative
allies.
nature of
Yeah,
some of
I'd
that.
love to get into that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we did with a gentleman. We won't say gentleman we follow that likes to talk about painting nails, right?
Not on this recording.
We
Yeah,
might have
we've talked
talked
about it
about it, but
previously. Yeah.
oh no, no, yeah, previously in some of our other chats. So,
Yeah,
in any
correct.
event,
Yeah.
what I was getting at is that I just know that if I take the time to shut up, listen, and really encourage people to speak freely, we come to a better conclusion, whatever it is. And one of my biggest frustrations in my current job, and if my managers listen to this, well, I've shared this with them anyway, and that is we're a European-based company. I was going to say country. We're a European-based company, and yet decisions that are made that affect the America's market, we're rarely consulted on. It's kind of like we know what's best for the company globally. Um, we don't really need to hear from those over there. And not being included is frustrating because I've been doing this since 1988, even longer in the business since I started working in industry. But you just want to be heard. And that's part of diversity and inclusion when you realize that having a more diverse and inclusive nature individually actually helps you come to a better conclusion. And how are you going to tackle almost any problem, whether that's a challenge at home with family issues or a construction project or a goal, a stretch goal for a company? There is, I think, for me, there's enough data to say it's beneficial. But how do we do that without harming others that on merit could be far and above the benefit that comes with being diverse, right? You could put a value on a diversity and say there's a certain amount of diversity we need to have, and there's a value on that. So that's going to tilt toward people that may not have on merit as much skill. But at what point do you just pass over everybody and put people in chairs because they check all the boxes? I think there's always going to be casualties, but we can't just tell the people that feel they're a casualty that they just need to get over it.
Yeah, if
So
the
that was
casualties aren't
kind of where
listening
I
to,
wanted to go, at least in this. I'm looking at the clock, Michael, and we're at 35 minutes. Typically, I don't like to do discussions that go much beyond this 35, 37 minutes, 40. I think it just becomes a little long for the audience. They can be broken down into smaller pieces. But what I'd like to do, if you're open to it, is do this on a regular basis and
sure.
call this our start, and let's agree to have more bite-sized, manageable, prepared, not scripted, but let's prepare topics around this. See what I would say. Let's see what others want to hear, right? Let's be inclusive and ask people what they want to hear. What did
Let's
they
throw it
gain
over to
from
the
this?
audience. Yeah.
What did they gain from what would they like to hear? But I do want to get to a point where you have a chance to sign off, but I do want to caution that I think we're kind of at the end of our time.
Sure. Yep, I'll give you that runway to sign off. Is there one last point I want to make about diversity? Like, I think it needs to be defined what specifically you're looking for with diversity. Is it backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, viewpoints, or are we talking demographics? Sorry, are we talking skin color and
Right.
sex? So when you get to the
Right.
skin color and sex diversity, the rebuttal is, well, isn't it more important about like diversity of qualifications and not having overlapping qualifications in an organisation? So you bring lots of skill sets to the organisation. So that diversity of skill sets, that's really important. Viewpoints, if you've got lots of different viewpoints coming to one discussion, you're probably going to come up with a more informed, nuanced response outcome than if you're all conforming from the same viewpoints. So I definitely am on board with all of that diversity. When you say diversity of skin colour, sorry, you haven't said it, but that demographic sense, I'd like to delve deeper into what's the particular benefit that you're looking for there. Is it the cultural attitudes? Is it being treated differently because of your skin colour in a society? Is that beneficial to bring into an organisation, that perspective? It would be very interesting just to delve deeper into what is the advantage of that particular diversity without being influenced, so to speak, by the different socioeconomic or viewpoint or those other diversity characteristics. So more
Yeah,
specificity on diversity is something
there's
I'd like.
no doubt there's going to be
Yeah. I'll throw it
no
over to
doubt
you
there's
though.
people
I
that
don't want to
have
take up all your time.
they have lived experience. No, they have lived experience and I'm sure knowledge that I simply don't have. Some of mine is visceral and I feel it in my gut and I feel what's right and what's wrong. But we might want to have others join us too that can help us learn or unlearn some new things that shed some new light on the topic for both of us. Because I don't think we should be polarized to think we have to support purely one side or purely another. We shouldn't get ourselves incensed whenever we hear the term DEI, and we shouldn't start screaming, "Oh my goodness, you're woke! This is terrible." At the same time, we shouldn't be holding purity tests and not allowing for informed and reasonable dialogue on the topic. That's what I've enjoyed about my interactions with you is that we can have a dialogue. I told you in a previous discussion we had that I was a very conservative Republican when I joined the voting population way back when in the Reagan years, and have moved away from that. I'd still say I'm theoretically conservative economically. I don't think today's conservatives are anywhere conservative economically, but I still believe in the concepts of limited government and the concepts of smaller government and less bureaucracy. I think bureaucracies are hardly inefficient, but I can have a discussion with people who think
I agree with that, absolutely.
about that or different. Yeah, but I can agree with, I can have a discussion with people who want to debate it. When people just tell me talking points, then then I can't have a discussion. But I told you I didn't want to, and I always can go right down that path of, political and philosophical things. But if you're okay with it, we'll wrap this up. We just hit 40 minutes, and most of that was recording time. So we'll test out. This is a plug for Riverside FM. It's going to be the first use of it for me today, so we're going to see how that works. But if you don't mind, Michael, I will. I'll end the session.